Welcome back to another deep dive where we unpack the key ideas from recent AI research.
Glad to be here.
So today we're looking at something pretty fundamental in reinforcement learning, specifically how we give rewards. The challenge has always been expanding RL with verifiable rewards beyond things like math or coding.
Exactly. Those domains are, well, structured. You often have a single right answer, easy to check.
Right. But what about medicine, economics, psychology? Much fuzzier. That's where this paper comes in. Crossing the Reward Bridge, expanding RL with verifiable rewards across diverse domains. It's from Tencent AI Lab and Suzhou University.
Yeah, by Yisu, Dian Yu, and a whole team, Linfeng Song, Juntao Li, Haitao Mi, Xiaopeng Tu, Min Zhang, and Dong Yu. A really solid group.
And this is super relevant if you're an AI researcher or ML engineer actually trying to get RL working on complex real-world problems, right? Where the data isn't neat and tidy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so for a quick rundown, like this first minute summary, the paper tackles extending RLVR, that's reinforcement learning, with verifiable rewards into these diverse domains where you just don't have those neat, short, verifiable answers readily available.
Okay, so how do they bridge that gap?
Well, the core idea, the kind of key insight, is that even for these complex tasks, different large language models, LLMs, actually agree surprisingly often on just a simple yes-no correctness judgment if you give them an expert-written reference answer.
Interesting. So consistency, even in complexity.
Right. And they leverage that
Yeah.
to handle answers that aren't just a simple term. They introduce this generative scoring technique. It gives you a soft, model-based reward score, moving beyond just binary verification.
So not just right or wrong, but how right.
Kind of, yeah. And crucially, they show you can train smaller models, like 7 billion parameter LLMs, to be effective cross-domain reward models. And you don't need tons of hand-labeled data for every single domain.
Wow, okay, that sounds much more practical. And the results?
Pretty significant performance gains.
Yeah.
Their RLVR framework outperformed state-of-the-art open-source models, they mentioned, Quinn 2.572b and DeepSeek R1 on freeform reasoning tasks.
Okay, great summary. So our mission today is to really unpack how this research expands RLVR's reach and offers this more flexible way to handle rewards in AI.
Sounds good.
Let's start with that initial challenge. Why has it been so hard to move RLVR beyond math and code?
Well, like we touched on, RLVR really found its footing where verification is easy. Think about math datasets like GSMAK or math. The answer is usually a number, right?
Yeah, 42. Simple check.
Exactly. Or coding, you run the code against test cases. Pass or fail. Binary. Verifiable.
So you can easily write a script, a rule, to check it.
Precisely. But now think about using RL for, I don't know, suggesting a medical treatment plan based on symptoms or evaluating an essay on historical context.
Right, there isn't just one single string that's correct. There are nuances, different valid phrasings.
Exactly. Applying a simple binary rule-based check to that kind of complex, free-form, unstructured answer. It just breaks down. The old approach focused on these rule-based verifiers, maybe looking for keywords or specific structure.
But they're brittle, aren't they? They miss valid answers that are phrased differently.
Totally. They struggle with the natural variation and subtlety of human language.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to write rules that cover every possible correct way to say something complex.
So that rule-based perfect match approach really hits a wall. Okay, so let's talk about that consistency finding. Why is it such a big deal that different LLMs tend to agree on correctness when given a reference?
It's pretty remarkable, actually. You take these broad tasks, unstructured answers, and you give various LLMs, big ones like GPT-4os, open source ones like Quinn 2.572b, instruct an expert-written reference answer alongside the model's generated answer. And they found these models show, really high agreement on whether the generated answer is basically correct or incorrect compared to that reference.
That does feel a bit counterintuitive. You'd expect more subjective judgment calls, more disagreement, especially on complex topics.
You would, wouldn't you? But the paper suggests that comparing a generated answer to a good reference simplifies the task for the LLM. It's easier than evaluating the answer in a vacuum, which requires much deeper domain understanding.
Ah, okay. So it's like grading with an answer key versus grading blind. The answer key provides strong guidance.
Reference-based evaluation is just fundamentally easier than reference-free verification.
Makes sense. So if these top models agree when they have a reference, what does that unlock for RLVR?
Well, the big implication is potentially reducing the massive effort needed for domain-specific human annotation to train reward models.
Ah, because you don't need humans to label every single answer variation in every field.
Right. Instead of needing experts in medicine, law, economics, etc., to painstakingly label thousands of examples as right or wrong, you could potentially leverage the consistent judgments of these powerful LLMs, using good reference answers as the anchor.
That could really speed things up and make RLVR feasible in many more areas. Huge scalability boost.
Definitely.
But the paper doesn't just stop at binary judgments, right? They talk about the limits of just correct versus incorrect. Why isn't that enough?
Yeah, while binary rewards are simple, they can be too coarse, especially for these unstructured tasks. Their own data analysis showed this. Even in math data sets like GSM-8K, which we think of as structured, only about 60% of the problems actually have those simple, single-term numerical answers that are easy to verify with a binary rule.
Only 60%.
Yeah. And when you look at more complex multi-domain questions, it drops even lower to maybe 45%.
So in almost half the cases or more, the answer isn't just one simple thing to check. There's probably partial credit involved or reasoning steps.
Exactly. An answer might be mostly right but miss a detail or have a minor flaw. A binary reward just says wrong for both, the same as a completely nonsensical answer. That doesn't give the learning process much signal.
Not very informative for learning.
Not at all. And that's why they propose moving to these soft rewards generated by model-based verifiers.
Okay, SOC scores. How do they give a more nuanced signal than just 0 or 1?
So instead of just outputting correct or incorrect, this generative verifier model is trained to output a specific token, like literally one token that summarizes its assessment.
A single token summary.
Yeah, and the soft reward isn't the token itself, but the probability the model assigns to that token, say the correct token.
Ah, so you're using the model's confidence in its own judgment as the reward signal.
Precisely. You get a continuous score reflecting how confident the verifier is that the answer matches the reference. That's a much richer signal than just yes or no.
That is clever. And you mentioned earlier that even smaller LLMs can do this. That seems key for practicality.
Yes, that's one of the really cool findings. They show you can train effective cross-domain verifiers using models around the 7 billion parameter size. You don't necessarily need a massive foundation model just to act as the judge.
Okay, but how do you train a 7B model to be a good judge across medicine, economics, and history without giving it tons of labeled data in each field? That seems like the core challenge.
It's a neat process.
Yeah.
They use a larger, more capable teacher model. In their case, it was Qwen 2.572B Instruct.
Okay.
During the RL training of the main agent, the one actually trying to answer the questions, it generates lots of answers. These attempts, along with the question and the reference answer, get fed to the big teacher model.
And the teacher provides a judgment.
Exactly. The teacher provides its soft score judgment. So now you have training examples for the small reward model, the question, the reference, the agent's generated answer, and the teacher's score.
Ah, so it's distillation. The small reward model learns to mimic the judgments of the bigger teacher model.
You got it. It's learning by distillation.
Yeah.
And because this training data comes from the RL agent's own exploration.
It's directly relevant to the kinds of mistakes and successes the agent is actually experiencing.
Precisely. The data is noisy, realistic, full of partially correct answers, near misses, all that stuff. This makes the smaller reward model more robust when evaluating the agent later.
Okay, this whole framework sounds really well thought out. Let's get into the validation. How did they test all this? What experiments did they run?
They used two main data sets, both pretty challenging. First was a big Chinese question, answering data set 773,000 pairs, covering elementary through high school level questions.
Okay.
And importantly, the reference answers were freeform, often included reasoning steps, and were much longer on average than things like GSM-8K. They translated to English using GPT-4 Mini for the experiments.
Longer freeform answers that definitely test the limits. And the second data set.
That was Exam QA, also originally Chinese, 638,000 college-level multiple-choice questions across tons of subjects. They converted these into freeform QA pairs by just keeping the correct answer and dropping the distractors. Again, translated to English.
College-level multi-subject. Sounds diverse.
Very. They even categorized it using GPT-4o Mini and found a good mix. STEM, social sciences, humanities, applied sciences, really broad coverage.
Okay, so two tough data sets designed to break simple verification. What did they compare their method against? What were the baselines?
Good question. They had several. Base, just the raw pre-trained model generating answers. SFT, which is supervised fine-tuning on the question-answer pairs, but without explicit chain of thought data.
Standard stuff.
Right. Then rule-based reward RL, using simple string matching like keyword checks or exact match for the reward signal during reinforcement learning.
The traditional approach they're trying to beat.
Exactly. And finally, They used a very strong baseline, using the big Qwen 2.572b instruct model itself as the reward model in the RL loop.
Ah, okay. So comparing their small distilled reward model against using a massive state-of-the-art model directly as the judge.
Yep. And their proposed model, RM7B, the 7 billion parameter one, trained via distillation on about 160,000 samples from that teacher model, was plugged into the RL framework, and they tested it using both the binary and the soft reward signals it learned to predict.
Okay, let's get to the results. What did Table 1 show? What were the key takeaways?
All right, Table 1 had some really interesting stuff. First, it just confirmed these data sets are hard. Even the big open source model struggled, especially on the multi-subject exam QA. So, good benchmarks.
Good for pushing the field.
Definitely. Second, RL reinforcement learning significantly beat just supervised fine-tuning, SFT, especially on math problems. This shows RL's power for learning reasoning, even without perfect step-by-step examples.
So interaction and reward really helps learn the task.
It does. Now, comparing the reward types, the model-based rewards, both their smaller RM7B and the big coup of 72B teacher, consistently did better than the simple rule-based reward on these freeform tasks.
That's a win for the learned reward approach.
A big win. And here's a key result. Their distilled 7B reward model, RM7B, performed comparably to, and sometimes even better than, using the huge 72B Q model directly as the reward function.
Get out! Seriously, the little 7B distilled model held its own against the giant 72B model as a judge.
Yep, that really speaks to how effective their distillation training was for capturing the essential judgment capability. Huge efficiency gain there.
That's incredibly promising. What about the soft versus binary reward distinction for their RM7B?
That was nuanced. For the rule-based system, using a soft similarity metric like Jacquard actually sometimes hurt performance compared to simple binary matching. Maybe irrelevant words threw off the similarity score.
Okay.
But for their model-based RM7B on the more structured math tasks, binary and soft rewards perform similarly. The model is probably confident enough for clear yes-no judgments there.
Makes sense.
But on the really diverse, complex exam QA dataset, the soft rewards gave a clear edge over binary.
So the nuance helps more when the problems are fuzzier.
That seems to be the idea. The more granular feedback from the soft reward helps guide the agent better when correctness isn't just black and white. They also mentioned using z-score normalization on rewards to keep the RL training stable, which is a common practice.
Right, stabilize ingredients. Okay, what about scaling? Does this learn-reward approach get better with more data?
Yes, they looked at that in Table 2. They compared rule-based reward versus their RM7B as they fed the RL process more and more training samples, up to 100K.
And
the rule-based reward was unstable. Performance jumped around, sometimes even got worse with more data.
not what you want to see. More data should ideally mean better performance.
Exactly. But the learned reward model, RM7B, showed consistent improvement as the training data grew. Clear upward trend.
So the model-based approach scales much more predictably and effectively. That's a big practical advantage.
Huge advantage. It suggests you can reliably improve performance by gathering more interaction data, unlike the brittle rule-based approach.
And did they test how well it generalizes? Like, does the RM7B work on datasets it wasn't trained on at all?
They did out-of-distribution evaluation, shown in Table 3. They tested on two completely new datasets, natural reasoning and web instruct.
And the results?
Once again, their RM7B significantly beat the rule-based reward approach. It showed strong generalization, meaning it learned underlying principles of correctness rather than just memorizing patterns from the training data distribution.
That's crucial. It means the reward model is genuinely useful beyond its specific training setup. Okay, let's try and crystallize the main contributions here. For our audience, what are the absolute key takeaways from this paper?
I'd say there are three main things. First, they really did extend RLVR's reach into diverse, complex domains way beyond the usual structured tasks. That's a big one.
Okay, broadening the scope.
Second, they introduced and validated this idea of generative, model-based soft rewards. They showed it improves generalization, robustness, and scalability compared to the old binary methods.
The soft reward mechanism itself is a key contribution.
Definitely. And third, maybe the most practical point, they demonstrated you can train compact cross-domain reward models like their 7B1 effectively, without needing massive amounts of domain-specific labels, thanks to that distillation technique.
Efficiency and practicality.
Right. And plus, they released their dataset, 570,000 examples, and the trained RM7B model on Hugging Face. That's fantastic for the community.
Yeah, open sourcing models and data is always great to see. Did the paper touch on any other interesting side discussions?
A few quick points. They noted their approach focuses on verifying the final answer, simplifying things compared to needing the reward model to also verify complex chain-of-thought reasoning steps. They also explicitly mentioned not focusing on format-based rewards, where you force the LM to output in a super specific structure just so it's easy to parse. Their learned model avoids that need for rigid formatting, saving human effort.
Less data wrangling.
Exactly. And they briefly connect reward modeling to next token prediction, which ties into some other recent research threads.
Okay, interesting side notes. So let's wrap this up. Bringing it all together, what's the bottom line for our listeners, the AI researchers and ML engineers?
I think the bottom line is this paper presents a really significant advance in making RL with verifiable rewards more practical and widely applicable. By cleverly using LLM consistency and introducing these generative soft rewards, they've created a more flexible, scalable, and robust framework.
And the fact that smaller distilled models can act as effective cross-domain judges is huge.
Absolutely. That really lowers the barrier to entry for applying RL in fields where getting perfect labeled reward data was previously a major bottleneck.
So what's the bigger picture significance here? Where does this point AI research?
Well, it potentially unlocks RL for a whole range of problems previously deemed too difficult for reward-based learning. Think about applying RL more effectively in education, personalized tutoring, healthcare decision support, maybe even complex scientific hypothesis generation. Anywhere correctness is nuanced.
It's exciting possibilities. Okay, as we finish this deep dive, here's a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. How might this shift from rigid, rule-based rewards towards more nuanced, model-based rewards change how we evaluate AI systems? If the definition of correct becomes more probabilistic and context-dependent, what new challenges and opportunities does that create for measuring progress and ensuring AI alignment in complex, real-world domains?
That's a deep question. It definitely pushes us beyond simple accuracy metrics and towards more holistic evaluation, considering the quality and reasoning behind AI outputs, not just a binary checkmark. It's a critical area for future work.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us for this detailed look into crossing the reward bridge. We definitely encourage you to check out the paper and the resources they've released.
Yeah, really valuable work.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.